Really pleased to be introducing Nick Kochan, and he's a financial and political journalist based in London, and he's written extensively on financial and white-collar crime. He writes for UK newspapers and international magazines, as well as co-written and books. So handing to you, Nick.
Okay. That's fine.
And the rest of you.
Hey. Well, thank you very much for inviting me today. And I think we're meeting on a very opportune time because we've just had the incredible Panama Papers, which I'm sure absolutely everyone will have heard of, because it shows the operations of a huge international offshore sector. And as we know from the Panama Papers, the offshore sector gives people both the secrecy of hiding criminal money and also the protection from the taxman and from law enforcement. So not only do individuals hide behind companies and trusts, but also they can put in the offshore sector the proceeds of crime. And what I'm saying is, it's a bit of a diversion. Because although we've been hearing about Panama, and we've been hearing about Isle of Man and BVI, all these places, the real money laundering center of the world is 50 miles from here in the city of London. That is where we have the corrupt bankers, we have the lawyers, we have the accountants, and what are loosely called the enablers. They carry out the finer points of money laundering, which is what I have been writing about for umpteen years, which these offshore places, the Delawares, the Panamas, the BVIs, they are the servants of what goes on in London. And they are not the masters. And I think, in a way, it's not inconvenient for the City of London to point to Panama and the rest and say, those are the bad boys. Because it gives them a bit of a cover for their own activities, which are far more monetarily important and also sort of dangerous. Now, why and how has London got to this position of being the money laundering centre of the world? And my view is it's because of what we've been hearing about, namely the funding, the supporting, and the boosting of the financial sector. We've seen over the last 40, 50 years, at the very least, and arguably much longer, the city being the recipient, the receptacle of a huge amount of tax breaks, investment, laxity from central government. And what that's meant is, gradually, the city has become a law unto itself. Now, if I can just bring that back to illustrate from the Panama Papers, we've seen a lot of stuff about Cameron and his father and his offshore trusts. And Cameron has always said, well, of course, I've done nothing illegal. Well, my view is the powers that be, by giving London this degree of authority, have been rowing back on that division that no one quite understands between evasion and avoidance. Now, of course, avoidance is perfectly legitimate, isn't it? Everybody knows, you don't pay a penny more tax than you want to. Now, I'm only saying that ironically, because of course that's the argument used by people who don't want to pay any tax at all. But they will at least say, well, we're not breaking the law, we're only avoiding. We wouldn't dream of evading, because evading is against the law. But the point is, who decides that fine line where it rests between avoiding and evading? And if you make avoiding a much bigger space, and you make evading a very, very, very tiny space, you then can always, someone comes to you and says, well, did you pay your taxes? Oh, I paid all I had to, and I avoided those that I quite legitimately didn't have to pay. And that is very convenient to people who effectively do not want to pay taxes. And I think what's happened is, we have got in power in this country over the last 50 years, people who want a very large space to avoid, and a very small number of outsiders whom they will describe as evaders. And that brings me, in a way, to London's property market, where we've seen a very large number of foreign international capital, a very large amount of international capital, flowing into London to take advantage of our very large avoiding tax regime and buying London properties. And of course, it's not just a large avoiding and relaxed tax regime, it's also a very large a weakening regime of control. Because together with looser controls on tax collection, which again I think is part of the sort of small state that was foreseen by Thatcher and created by Thatcher, we've seen altogether looser powers within the tax collectors, within the law enforcers, within the kind of regulatory organizations. They've all lost the plot effectively because of the small state, because basically we don't need so much tax now, because don't we all want the private sector to step in and take over? Well, what's happened is, effectively, it's become self-fulfilling. Less tax, smaller state. And as a result, London, in part, is now awash with a huge amount of money that hasn't paid taxes anywhere, and that money has headed into its properties, pushing up the prices for people who, at the bottom of the ladder, and bringing into London hot money that will go out as quick as it will come in. Closest to Parliament, not far from the city, you have a whole huge number of houses that are completely empty. And they've been bought by the hot money that's left Russia, it's left China, it's left Nigeria, it's left those corrupt places where effectively there are no controls on political, where the politicians either make their money or spend their money. And that money has left those countries, and guess where it's come? It's come to the City of London and to Westminster, where you can buy a very reliable investment. You don't need to live in it. It's part of the housing stock of our country. How do you make sure that nobody knows that, it's you, President Abacha, it's you, President Putin, it's you, President of China, or whatever, that is owning this house in Bishop's Avenue in Hampstead, that no one is ever going to live in from one year to the next, except the price will go up proportionately or disproportionately. And the answer is you buy yourself a company in the BVI, and that buys another company in the BVI. So you don't just have one protection, but two. And I've just actually been writing about this in one particular case, and I'll tell you in a second. And then you put that company into a trust. And if I'm right in saying a trust is completely sort of opaque, it's like a solid wall, you can't see round it, over it, or under it. So that way, you not only avoid tax, inheritance tax, capital gains tax, whatever, you also are completely anonymous. You're just, something, BVI company. And I was writing recently about a guy who was a fixer, a so-called enabler banker, who's just arranged for the the Prime Minister of Malaysia to extract $681 million from his state development fund. The banker got $33 million for his services, and he used 10 million of that to buy a house in central London. And there he, as I say, used 2 BVI companies and a trust to hide it. I'm waiting to see if he's going to sue me in the next few days. Now, and we've discovered from the Mossack Fonseca, they've been very useful because they have showed us a lot of this kind of company activity and trust activity, and all the guys that are hiding, and a few women, but probably not nearly as many, who are hiding their properties from the state, from their own state, from our state, and from anyone who would have any interest in them. And actually, just a day or two ago, we heard, I think, about Tony Blair, that philanthropist of us all, who indeed has got his own trusts and BVI companies and all the rest of it. And actually, I gather as well, Sherry and their son Ewan has just bought themselves five more flats in the north of England to take advantage of some changes for buy-to-let landlords. That will bring, I think, their total up to about 32 or 33 properties. And I wrote a book last year, which incidentally you can buy because there are 3 copies on the counter, where we talked about Blair's wealth. And Blair has made, we reckon, between 80 and 100 million pounds in the last couple of years from his property, but also from going around talking to autocrats, oligarchs, dictators around the world, who are looking to buy his sort of quotes respectability, for which they'll pay him an awful lot of money. So it is very, but it's depressing, but it's also quite interesting when you look at that, and then look at, sad to say, what's happened over 13 years of Labour government, and you say to yourself, well, why didn't they do anything about all this hot money that came into London? Why didn't they tighten up on Russian oligarchs, on Roman Abramovich buying his mansions in London? And I think you could sort of say to yourself, well, perhaps vested interest, even in the Labour Party at that time, was a substantial cause. Now, I think it's actually personally one of the very strongest professions, one of the strongest qualifications of Jeremy Corbyn. However, whatever one thinks of him, as it were, as a personality, that he is extremely parsimonious, honest with money, straightforward with his expenditure, and decent in his image. To now he can say, you guys, you're the crooks, you're the big spenders, you're the corrupt money launderers. I am a straightforward, albeit parsimonious guy. Now, there are in London 36,342 properties held by offshore companies. Most of them are in the BVI, but some of them are in Jersey. We hope one of the great trumpeting of Cameron now is he is going to say, show us your owners. He's going to produce a list in the UK that's going to say for UK companies, show us who is your ultimate beneficial owner. So let's get behind the trust, let's behind the companies. Who is really owning you? Is it President Putin? Is it the President of China? Now, the problem is, of course, even if Cameron does this, he won't do it for Jersey or Guernsey or even for the BVI or any of these places, Cayman, because their own laws. So it's a bit of a fig leaf, quite frankly. The guys in London, in the city, coming back to my earlier theme, are protecting themselves. This is about covering their backs, covering their wealth, and my time is up, but I think I've made the point. London is the world's money laundering, both money laundering centre and the centre where black money can safely be stored. And it's a shame and it's a travesty, and we hope that in time to come it will be kicked out. Thank you.
Hello. Thanks so much, Nick. We've got 15 minutes to take some questions, so yeah.
They are just the servants of the City of London, and that it is these enablers who are so important in the process of the money laundering. Now, I'm also interested in how close the City of London and these enablers are to our British government and the tax laws that they produce, because I think I've heard that these, and I think you might say that some of these big chartered accountants are part of the enabling process, and the lawyers, of course, as well, in drawing up these various documents to hide the money. The chartered accountants actually work inside the Treasury to produce the tax laws of this country. So, in other words, you've got those who are trying to evade the taxes making the laws of the country. Is there any truth in that?
Very interesting comment that you make there. It was just recently disclosed that the man who's just recently taken over running HMRC, our tax authorities, was actually in the same firm that was used to monitor, or rather was a client of where Cameron's father's trust was a client. So we had Cameron's father's trust using this guy, or using the firm of Simmons and Simmons, and he has now gone as the person running the tax authority that is supposed to be taxing the people that he once was employed by and who paid him. And, it's just one case, but there are plentiful cases of conflicts of interest where bankers have gone to work for governments. If you think about John Redwood and the Tories, who was part of the privatisation process and then in government, you've got, formerly with the Merchant Bank, you've got umpteen of the people in government who have been or are being paid by private financial interests. Of course, there's a lot of disclosure required and all the rest of it, but who actually is paying any attention? And, why does it happen in the first place? Disclosure to me is a very weak tool for holding people to account. You've actually got to ban people from, if they've been in the private sector, they can't become a regulator or a law enforcer or something. You've got to have a real separation of powers, in my opinion.
Go ahead, please, yeah.
Well, I would like to know this knowledge that what you are telling us, how could we use it to change the situation? Because it seems that we are always bombarded with all this information, and the question is what ordinary people can do to stop this, to change it. We talk about Jeremy Corbyn, but what can you tell us, what can we do? And the other thing is, in the past I was listening to something called Positive Money website. And the question is it possible that in the Positive Money they talk about the fact that banks make money, create money, and this continuous creation money is somehow what facilitates all the situation of corruption? Could you make a comment about these 2 points?
Yes, on the subject of what we can do, well, I think this question of the Panama Papers, although I think they are a bit of a smokescreen from London and holding London to account, I do think it's quite powerful holding, people that use the offshore world, even if they are only, as it were, second stage, if you like, if the prime laundering is happening in London, even if, as it were, the secondary laundering, the trusts and the companies are being created in the offshore world. We can see from the response of the Panama Papers, that it makes them very, very uncomfortable. And I actually think this question of ultimate beneficial ownership, getting behind the structures to who is creating them, it's pointing the finger at tax evaders. And I think if we want to make one sort of active, go out and demand sort of thing, I think it's saying, let's bring more avoiders into the evasion pot. Let's show us who is using the structures and who is buying up London properties and leaving them empty. So I think that is, that's something that we can sort of do campaign on and demand from politicians. Yeah, we saw in the financial crisis the danger of money being based on money, ultimately having no underpinning. And to my mind, I'm less kind of exercised by that, because I think I quite like seeing banks exposed and exploded, quite frankly. I just don't think the people should have to underwrite banks that fail. I think they should just be allowed to collapse. I do worry about the Bitcoins. I think there is strong evidence the Bitcoin industry is in the hands of organized crime, and they are exploiting it. And I do know a little bit about one or two cases of that. So, I think, where money is, what it's based on, is critical to its ethical component.
Okay, I'm going to ask a quick question, then I'll pass over to Steve. So I was wondering about links to the fantastic homes for people, protecting council homes, the campaigns that we've seen in London, and do they have this information? And there's something incredibly iconic about these empty mansions, and is there any squatting movements going on? So that's my question, and I'm going to quickly get Steve to ask his before you finish off.
I was going to be cheeky maybe and try and answer the question about positive money. Positive money are talking about who creates money and on what terms. They're an NGO based up in London, and they're trying to take the control of money out of the hands of private banks who operate on what is called fractional reserve banking and nationalise the creation of money. And it's similar to how you see it in Germany, for example, where a lot of the lender, the state governments and also local governments actually control their own banks. So the people who are issuing the money, the credit, are doing so for public benefit, not just always private profit. So positive money, I think, are a really good NGO to look at. The other one I'd recommend is an NGO called Stamp Out Poverty, who are the ones that are leading on the Tobin tax, which is the transaction tax that the speaker referred to earlier, sometimes also called the Robin Hood tax. So in terms of campaign groups that you can support, Stamp Out Poverty is one, and positive money, I think, is another.
Yeah. No, just on this, first of all, there are squatters who have occupied houses in Bishop's Avenue, which is one of the largest settlements of these empty mansions. It is, of course, these empty mansions are protected by small armies, as you can imagine, hired by the Arab sheikhs or the Russian oligarchs or the Kazakh oligarchs. I think, one thing just to sort of sum up is, in a way, what we're looking at with this sort of laundering is not just, big houses in London, but let's also think about... Sorry, was that me? let's also think about what that money's come from, as well as what it's coming into. And in my thinking, that money has come from many poor countries. It's been ripped off by politicians. It's been exploited. It's resulted in all sorts of local failures in countries that can't afford it. I mean, if you think about, a collapsing bridge or a collapsing building in China, the people there will pay the price in their lives. The people here will pay the price by not having properties and giving tax breaks to people that have done nothing for our communities. So I think corruption fails at every community and every level. And I think one of the things that I think we need to do is campaign against corruption. It's a social evil and a social crime. And I think if we want to do something, it's there, and it's Transparency International, or it's something called CLAMP, which I just went on a bus tour the other day, which is about kleptocracy and kleptocrats who are buying up these houses. So, yes, corruption is, I think, the key root of evil.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was fantastic talk.
Thank you.